the birth of ancient Persia, and the first civilizations of Iran, long before Rome rose from dust. Before medieval Europe even existed, a civilization was already breathing between the mountains and deserts of the Iranian plateau. Imagine a land where traders crossed endless caravan routes carrying gold, spices, stories, and beliefs from India to Mesopotamia. This was not an isolated corner of history. This was the birthplace of one of humanity's oldest continuous civilizations. Thousands of years ago, the Elamites built powerful kingdoms in what is now southwestern Iran, creating cities, temples, and systems of government, while much of the world still struggled to organize itself. The land itself shaped its people. Harsh deserts demanded resilience. Towering mountains created natural fortresses. And somewhere in that rugged landscape, a cultural identity began forming, one that would survive invasions, revolutions, empires, and even the collapse of entire worlds around it. When most people hear the word Iran, they think of modern conflicts and political tensions. But the story of Iran did not begin in the 20th century. It began 5,000 years ago, in the fire of ancient kingdoms that refused to disappear. As centuries passed, tribes of Indo-Aryan peoples migrated into the plateau, bringing new languages, traditions, and warrior cultures. Among them were the Persians and the Medes, groups that would eventually reshape world history. But at first, they were not masters of empires. They were fragmented peoples, surviving between larger powers like Assyria and Babylon. Yet history often hides its greatest transformations inside moments of weakness. The Persians learned from every empire around them. They absorbed military strategies, religious ideas, systems of trade, and administrative knowledge. Slowly, quietly, they evolved. The fascinating part is that ancient Persia was never built only through conquest. It was built through adaptation. While other civilizations destroyed what they conquered, the Persians became experts at incorporating cultures into something larger. That mindset would later become one of the greatest strengths of the Persian Empire, and one of the reasons its legacy still echoes today. What made this region extraordinary was not only its armies or wealth, but its ability to connect civilizations. Iran sat at the crossroads of East and West. Ideas flowed through it like rivers. Science, astronomy, architecture, religion, poetry, and philosophy all mixed within its borders. Even in ancient times, Persia understood something many empires never learned. Influence could be stronger than fear. That understanding would soon produce a ruler whose name would become legendary across continents. A man so respected that even his enemies admired him. A king remembered not merely as a conqueror, but as a liberator. And when he emerged from the shadows of history, the world itself would begin to change forever. But before that transformation came a dangerous reality. The Near East was dominated by brutal superpowers. Assyrians ruled through terror. Babylon projected enormous strength. Entire populations lived under fear of destruction and slavery. In this environment, survival required more than courage. It required vision. The Persians were still considered minor players by the giants surrounding them. Few could imagine that these scattered tribes would soon create the largest empire the world had ever seen. Yet, deep inside the mountains of Persia, the conditions for revolution were forming. Leadership was emerging, loyalty was consolidating, and destiny was moving toward a single figure whose rise would permanently alter human history. The stage was now set for one of the most astonishing political and military expansions ever recorded. A young leader from the Persian lands would unite divided peoples, overthrow mighty kingdoms, and build an empire stretching from the Mediterranean to India. But what made him truly different was not only his military brilliance. It was the revolutionary way he treated conquered nations. His name was Cyrus the Great, and his story would redefine the meaning of power itself. How Cyrus the Great created the largest empire of the ancient world. Cyrus the Great did not begin his journey surrounded by glory. He was born into a fractured world where kingdoms constantly betrayed one another and survival depended on force. Yet even as a young ruler of the Persians, there was something unusual about him. Ancient accounts describe a man with extraordinary calm under pressure. A leader capable of inspiring fierce loyalty without relying solely on fear. At a time when most conquerors burned cities to the ground, Cyrus understood the deeper power of respect. But before he could transform the world, he first had to challenge the Medes, the dominant force controlling Persia itself. Few believed he could succeed. The Medes possessed stronger armies, greater resources, and decades of political control. Still, Cyrus moved carefully, building alliances and turning dissatisfaction into opportunity. Then came the rebellion that changed history. In a stunning campaign, he defeated the Median king Astyages, and united the Persians and Medes under one banner. It was not merely a military victory. It was the birth of an empire, unlike anything the ancient world had seen before. What happened next shocked neighboring civilizations. Instead of stopping after securing Persia, Cyrus launched a series of campaigns with astonishing speed and precision. Lydia, one of the wealthiest kingdoms in the world, fell to him. Its legendary king Croesus, known for unimaginable riches, could not stop the Persian advance. Then Cyrus turned toward Babylon, the enormous city many believed was impossible to conquer. Massive walls surrounded it. Rivers protected it. Its rulers trusted their defenses completely. But Cyrus understood that empires often collapse from arrogance long before enemies break through their gates. According to historical tradition, Persian forces diverted the Euphrates River and entered Babylon through the riverbed during the night. The city fell with surprisingly little destruction. And then Cyrus did something revolutionary. Instead of humiliating Babylon's people, he respected their religion, restored local traditions, and allowed captive populations, including the Jewish exiles, to return home. In a brutal age defined by cruelty, this behavior felt almost unimaginable. That decision transformed Cyrus into more than a conqueror. It made him a symbol. Many historians consider him one of the first rulers to practice a form of imperial tolerance. The famous Cyrus Cylinder, often described as one of the earliest declarations of human rights, presented a radically different model of leadership. Cyrus believed an empire could remain stable not by crushing identities, but by protecting them. Temples were rebuilt. Local customs were preserved. Diverse peoples were allowed to maintain their languages and beliefs. This strategy created loyalty across enormous territories. Instead of endless rebellions, many regions accepted Persian rule because it offered something rare for the ancient world: stability without cultural annihilation. And as the empire expanded from Central Asia to the borders of Egypt, the Persians developed roads, communication systems, and administrative structures that connected millions of people across continents. Imagine the scale of what Cyrus achieved. Before him, no empire had unified so many different cultures under such an organized structure. Trade flourished across enormous distances. Goods, knowledge, and ideas traveled safely through Persian-controlled lands. Entire populations experienced levels of economic integration that had never existed before. Persia became the center of the known world. Yet beneath the glory, new dangers were forming. Maintaining such a vast empire required constant strength. Rival civilizations watched Persia's rise with growing fear. Among them were the Greek small city-states divided by politics but fiercely protective of their independence. At first, they seemed insignificant compared to Persia's colossal power. But history often turns on conflicts no one expects to matter. Cyrus himself would die during military campaigns in Central Asia, leaving behind an empire larger than any before it. But his legacy did not disappear with him. His successors inherited not only territory, but a vision of imperial greatness. The Persian Empire was now a superpower stretching across 3 continents. Its wealth was beyond imagination. Its armies terrified rivals. Its kings ruled from magnificent palaces filled with gold, art, and symbols of universal authority. Yet the larger Persia became, the more impossible it was to avoid collision with ambitious enemies. Soon, a conflict would erupt between East and West that would echo through history for thousands of years. The Persian kings would march toward Greece, and the world would witness one of the most legendary rivalries ever told. The Achaemenid Empire, expansion, wealth, and religious tolerance under the successors of Cyrus the Great. The Persian Empire entered an age of astonishing expansion. What had begun as a powerful kingdom transformed into the Achaemenid Empire, the greatest superpower on earth. From the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Afghanistan, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley, millions of people now lived under Persian rule. No empire before had governed territories so vast with such efficiency. But Persia's true strength was not only military conquest, it was organization. King Darius I, one of the most brilliant administrators in ancient history, understood that empires collapse when communication fails. So he built roads stretching thousands of kilometers across the empire. The most famous, the Royal Road, allowed messages to travel at unprecedented speed. Ancient observers marveled that neither snow, rain, nor darkness could stop Persian couriers. In many ways, Persia created the foundation for large-scale imperial administration that later civilizations would imitate for centuries. The wealth flowing into Persia became legendary. Tribute arrived from dozens of conquered nations. Gold from Lydia, precious stones from Central Asia, ivory from India, grain from Egypt, cedar from Lebanon. The imperial capital at Persepolis symbolized this immense prosperity. Massive staircases, towering columns, intricate carvings, and grand ceremonial halls projected a message to the world. Persia was the center of civilization itself. Delegations from across the empire traveled there, bringing gifts and pledging loyalty to the king. Yet despite this enormous power, the Persian rulers avoided forcing uniformity upon their subjects. This was one of the empire's most extraordinary characteristics. While many conquerors erased local identities, the Persians allowed different cultures to survive. Egyptians kept their religious traditions. Babylonians maintained their temples. Jews were permitted to rebuild Jerusalem. This policy was not simple kindness. It was intelligent statecraft. Persia understood that respect could stabilize an empire more effectively than terror alone. Religion played a central role in Persian identity. Although the empire governed many faiths, the rulers themselves were deeply influenced by Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. Its teachings emphasized the eternal struggle between truth and chaos, light and darkness, justice and corruption. These ideas shaped Persian kingship. The king was expected to defend order and righteousness across the empire. In royal inscriptions, rulers described themselves not merely as conquerors, but as protectors chosen to preserve harmony in the world. This gave Persian rule a moral dimension uncommon in ancient imperial politics. Subjects were not only expected to obey Ea, they were expected to participate in maintaining cosmic order itself. That worldview created a civilization with remarkable cultural confidence and spiritual depth. But enormous success often creates dangerous ambition. As Persia grew wealthier and more powerful, its rulers increasingly turned their attention westward. Across the Aegean Sea lay the Greek city-states, small, divided, and constantly fighting among themselves. To the Persians, Greece appeared fragmented and politically weak. Yet the Greeks possessed something difficult to measure: an intense commitment to independence. Tensions escalated when Greek cities in Asia Minor revolted against Persian control, with support from Athens. To the Persian kings, this was more than rebellion. It was an insult to imperial authority. Darius vowed punishment. What began as regional unrest soon evolved into one of the most famous geopolitical confrontations in human history. East against West. Empire against independence. Persia against Greece. At the height of its glory, the Achaemenid Empire seemed unstoppable. Its armies numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Its treasuries overflowed with unimaginable riches. Its infrastructure connected civilizations across continents. Yet history has a way of testing even the strongest empires at the moment they appear invincible. The coming wars with Greece would expose not only Persia's immense power, but also the limits of imperial expansion. And among the Persian rulers who would carry this conflict forward, one name would become legendary forever: Xerxes, the king who marched toward Greece with an army so vast that ancient writers claimed it shook the earth itself. The wars between Persians and Greeks. Xerxes against Sparta and Athens. When King Darius died before completing his campaign against Greece, the responsibility passed to his son Xerxes. The first-in Xerxes was determined to accomplish what his father could not. For years, Persia prepared for the largest military expedition the ancient world had ever witnessed. Bridges were constructed across the Hellespont. Supply lines stretched across continents. Soldiers arrived from every corner of the empire: Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Babylonians, Phoenicians, and countless others. Ancient historians described an army so enormous that rivers supposedly dried as troops drank from them. Whether exaggerated or not, one truth remains undeniable: Greece was facing a force unlike anything it had ever seen. Most Greek city-states understood the terrifying reality before them. Alone, none could survive against Persia. Yet unity among Greeks was rare. Rivalries and political hatred divided them constantly. And still, as the Persian invasion advanced toward Europe, a fragile alliance slowly emerged between Sparta, Athens, and other Greek cities. They knew the coming war could determine the future of their civilization itself. Then came one of the most legendary moments in military history: Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass where King Leonidas of Sparta and his small force chose to stand against Xerxes' massive army. The battle became far more than a military confrontation. It became a symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds. For days, the Greeks held the pass, using terrain and discipline to neutralize Persia's numerical advantage. Persian assaults repeatedly failed. The Spartans fought with terrifying precision, turning the narrow passage into a deadly trap. But betrayal changed everything. A local Greek revealed a hidden path, allowing Persian forces to surround the defenders. Knowing death was certain, Leonidas dismissed most allied troops and remained with his Spartans and a small group of loyal Greeks. They fought until the very end. The Persians won the battle, but the psychological impact was far more complicated. Greece had witnessed extraordinary sacrifice, and Persia had discovered that conquering free city-states would not be as easy as crushing ordinary kingdoms. As Xerxes pushed deeper into Greece, Athens was evacuated and burned. Smoke rose from the ancient city while Persian forces celebrated what appeared to be inevitable victory. Yet behind the destruction, the Greeks were preparing something unexpected. Themistocles, the brilliant Athenian strategist, lured the Persian navy into the narrow waters of Salamis. Persia possessed far more ships, but the confined space neutralized that advantage. Greek vessels rammed and shattered Persian ships in chaotic close combat. Xerxes himself reportedly watched the disaster unfold from a nearby throne overlooking the sea. What had seemed unstoppable suddenly looked vulnerable. The Persian navy suffered catastrophic losses. Without secure naval control, maintaining such a massive invasion force became dangerously difficult. For the first time, the aura of Persian invincibility cracked before the eyes of the ancient world. The following year, Greek forces achieved another decisive victory at Plataea, effectively ending Persia's attempt to conquer mainland Greece. Yet these wars became much larger than territorial conflict. They shaped how civilizations viewed themselves for centuries. To many Greeks, victory against Persia symbolized the triumph of political freedom over imperial domination. To Persia, the campaigns revealed the difficulty of controlling fiercely independent populations at the edges of empire. But history is rarely as simple as heroes and villains. Persian civilization remained one of the most advanced societies on earth. Its architecture, administration, philosophy, and cultural sophistication continued influencing neighboring civilizations long after the battles ended. At the same time, the Greeks emerged with growing confidence, setting the stage for their own future expansion and cultural dominance. What neither side could fully foresee was that these wars were only the beginning of an even greater transformation. Greece itself would eventually produce a conqueror whose ambition surpassed imagination. A young king from Macedonia, who studied the stories of Achilles and dreamed not merely of defending Greece, but of conquering the entire known world. And when he turned his eyes toward Persia, the ancient empire built by Cyrus the Great would face its greatest test yet. His name was Alexander, and his arrival would bring one of history's most dramatic collapses. The invasion of Alexander the Great and the fall of ancient Persia. By the time Alexander of Macedon rose to power, the Persian Empire had ruled vast territories for more than 2 centuries. From a distance, Persia still appeared magnificent, rich cities, enormous armies, royal palaces glittering with gold. But inside the empire, cracks had begun to spread. Corruption weakened parts of the administration. Regional revolts became harder to contain. Rivalries inside the royal court drained stability from the throne. Persia was still powerful, but it no longer possessed the unstoppable momentum of Cyrus or Darius. And across the western frontier, a young king with almost impossible ambition was preparing to strike. Alexander had grown up hearing stories of the Persian invasions of Greece. To him, Persia represented both revenge and destiny. But unlike ordinary rulers, Alexander did not seek limited victories. He wanted total conquest. He wanted immortality through history itself. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed into Asia with a relatively small but highly disciplined army. At first, many Persians underestimated him. How could a young Macedonian king challenge the largest empire on earth? Yet Alexander possessed something extraordinarily dangerous: speed, unpredictability, and absolute confidence. At the Battle of Granicus, his forces defeated Persian regional armies. At Issus, he confronted King Darius III directly and shattered Persian lines in a stunning victory. Ancient accounts describe chaos spreading through the Persian army as Darius fled the battlefield. For the first time in generations, the great king of Persia appeared vulnerable before the world. But Alexander did not stop. City after city fell before him. Egypt surrendered. Phoenician strongholds collapsed after brutal sieges. Then came the march toward the Persian heartland itself, the symbolic center of imperial power. When Alexander entered Persepolis, he walked into one of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world. Massive halls, supported by towering columns, displayed the glory of centuries of Persian rule. Relief carvings showed delegates from dozens of nations, bringing tribute to the king. Treasure filled royal vaults beyond imagination. Yet what happened next became one of history's most controversial moments. Persepolis was burned. Some historians argue Alexander ordered the destruction as revenge for the Persian burning of Athens generations earlier. Others believe alcohol, emotion, and political theater played a role. Whatever the reason, flames consumed parts of the ceremonial capital that symbolized the soul of the Achaemenid Empire. In that fire, an era died. The empire created by Cyrus the Great collapsed beneath the advance of a conqueror who now claimed to rule Asia itself. But Alexander's relationship with Persia became increasingly complex. The more he conquered, the more fascinated he became with Persian culture. He adopted Persian clothing, court rituals, and administrative systems. He married Persian nobility and encouraged integration between Macedonians and Persians. This shocked many of his Greek followers, who expected Persia to remain a defeated enemy. Yet Alexander understood something profound. Destroying Persia entirely would weaken the empire he was trying to build. Instead, he attempted to fuse civilizations together into a new imperial identity. In many ways, Persian influence survived precisely because it was too sophisticated to erase. Even in defeat, Persian culture transformed its conquerors. That cultural resilience would become one of Iran's defining historical traits for the next 2,000 years. Then, almost as suddenly as his rise, Alexander's life ended. In 323 BC, at only 32 years old, he died in Babylon under mysterious circumstances. His massive empire fractured almost immediately among rival generals. The unified Macedonian conquest could not survive without him. And within this chaos, Persian identity slowly began reawakening. Foreign rulers controlled Iran, but the memory of Persian greatness never disappeared. Beneath the surface, traditions, language, religion, and cultural pride endured. The ancient empire had fallen, yet Persia itself refused to die. And in the centuries ahead, new Iranian dynasties would rise again, reclaiming power and rebuilding Persian civilization from the ruins left behind by Alexander's conquest. The Persian revival through the Parthian and Sassanid empires after Alexander's death. His empire shattered into competing kingdoms ruled by his former generals. Iran fell under the control of the Seleucid Empire, a Hellenistic dynasty that tried to spread Greek culture across Persian lands. Greek cities were founded. Greek became the language of administration in many regions. Statues, theaters, and Hellenistic customs spread throughout the territory once ruled by the Achaemenids. Yet beneath the surface, Persian identity remained alive. Villages still preserved ancient traditions. Noble families remembered the glory of Cyrus and Darius. Zoroastrian priests protected old beliefs. Persia had lost political control, but its cultural memory survived like embers waiting for the right moment to ignite again. And eventually, that moment arrived from the northeast, carried by fierce horsemen known as the Parthians. The Parthian Empire emerged gradually, almost unexpectedly. Unlike the centralized structure of the old Persian kings, the Parthians ruled through a looser network of noble families and regional power. But what they lacked in administrative unity, they compensated for with military brilliance. Their cavalry became legendary across the ancient world. Mounted archers could fire devastating volleys while retreating at full speed, a tactic so feared it gave birth to the expression, Parthian shot. When Rome began expanding eastward, it soon encountered an enemy unlike any it had faced before. At the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, the Parthians humiliated one of Rome's greatest armies, killing thousands of soldiers and crushing the ambitions of the Roman general, Crassus. Suddenly, Persia was no longer a defeated civilization, living in the shadow of Greece. It had returned as a geopolitical superpower, capable of standing against Rome itself. For centuries, Rome and Parthia fought for dominance over the Middle East. Cities changed hands repeatedly. Borders shifted constantly. But something deeper was happening during this era. Iran became a bridge between civilizations once again. Trade routes connected China, India, Central Asia, and the Mediterranean through Persian-controlled lands. Silk, spices, precious metals, and ideas crossed enormous distances. The Silk Road flourished, bringing wealth and cultural exchange into Iranian cities. Yet despite military success and economic prosperity, the Parthian system struggled with internal divisions. Powerful nobles often challenged central authority, weakening the empire from within. And as Rome grew more aggressive, Persia needed stronger unity. That need eventually gave rise to a new dynasty determined not merely to restore Persia but to resurrect its ancient imperial glory completely. In the 3rd century AD, the Sassanid Empire rose under Ardashir, overthrowing the Parthians and rebuilding a centralized Persian state. The Sassanids consciously connected themselves to the ancient Achaemenid kings, presenting their empire as the rightful continuation of Persia's original greatness. Grand palaces, monumental architecture, and royal ceremonies returned with extraordinary intensity. Zoroastrianism became the official state religion, deeply shaping law, politics, and social life. The Sassanid kings viewed themselves as defenders of cosmic order against chaos, continuing traditions rooted in ancient Persia. Under rulers like Shaparai and Khosroi, the empire achieved remarkable cultural and scientific achievements. Persian scholars translated texts from India and Greece. Advances in medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and engineering flourished. At the same time, the Sassanids became Rome's greatest eastern rival, fighting brutal wars that stretched across centuries. But endless conflict carried a terrible cost. By the 7th century, both the Byzantine Empire and the Sassanids were exhausted after decades of devastating warfare. Entire regions were economically drained. Populations suffered under heavy taxation and instability. Few realized that a new force was rapidly emerging from the Arabian Peninsula, driven not by ancient imperial tradition, but by a revolutionary religious movement that would transform the Middle East forever. The Persian Empire had survived Greeks, nomads, and Romans. Yet the next wave would challenge not only Persian political power, but the very spiritual and cultural foundations of Iranian civilization itself. And before that transformation fully unfolded, one ancient religion would leave a permanent mark on the soul of Iran. Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism, the religion that shaped the identity of Iran. Long before Islam arrived in Persia, before mosques dominated city skylines, and Arabic transformed the language of power, another faith guided the Iranian world. Its fires burned inside sacred temples across the empire. Its priests advised kings. Its philosophy influenced laws, morality, and the very understanding of good and evil. That religion was Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zarathustra, known in the West as Zoroaster. Historians still debate exactly when he lived, but his message would become one of the most influential spiritual revolutions in human history. At the center of his teachings stood a powerful idea. The universe was a battlefield between truth and falsehood, light and darkness, order and chaos. Human beings were not passive spectators in this struggle. Every choice mattered. Every action carried moral weight. In a world filled with violent empires and unpredictable suffering, this vision gave ancient Persians something profoundly meaningful, a sense that justice itself was woven into the structure of existence. Zoroastrianism shaped Persian civilization far beyond religion alone. Kings ruled under the belief that they had a sacred duty to defend truth and maintain cosmic balance. Fire became a powerful symbol, not because Persians worshipped flames, as outsiders sometimes claimed, but because fire represented purity, wisdom, and divine presence. Across the empire, sacred fires burned continuously inside temples, cared for by priests who preserved ancient rituals for generations. Concepts that later appeared in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, such as heaven, hell, angels, final judgment, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil, were deeply developed within Zoroastrian thought centuries earlier. This makes Persia not only a political force in world history, but also a spiritual one. The Iranian plateau became a place where ideas about morality, destiny, and the afterlife evolved in ways that still influence billions of people today. Yet what made Zoroastrianism especially powerful inside Persian society was its connection to identity itself. To be Persian often meant participating in a civilization built around these values of order, loyalty, truthfulness, and righteous leadership. Festivals like Nowruz, the Persian New Year celebrated at the spring equinox, reflected this worldview of renewal and cosmic balance. Even today, millions of Iranians continue celebrating traditions rooted in ancient Zoroastrian culture, despite centuries of religious transformation. This continuity reveals something remarkable about Iran's history. Political systems may collapse, conquerors may arrive, religions may change, but deep cultural memory survives. Persia repeatedly absorbed foreign influence without fully losing itself. That resilience became one of the defining patterns of Iranian civilization. Still, no civilization remains untouched forever. As the Sassanid Empire weakened under endless wars against Byzantium, dissatisfaction spread among ordinary people. Heavy taxation burdened farmers and merchants. Political rivalries destabilized the court. Some minorities resented rigid religious hierarchies tied to the state. At precisely this moment of exhaustion, a new religious and political force exploded outward from Arabia. Inspired by Islam and united under extraordinary momentum, Arab armies advanced into Persian territory. At first, many Sassanids underestimated the threat. Persia had survived mighty Rome for centuries. How could scattered desert tribes destroy one of the world's oldest empires? But history often changes when exhausted powers fail to recognize new realities forming at their borders. The battles that followed would permanently transform Iran. The Sassanid Empire collapsed with shocking speed during the Islamic conquests of the 7th century. Zoroastrian institutions lost political dominance. Arabic became the language of administration and religion across much of the region. Yet Persia did not simply vanish into the Islamic world. Instead, something far more complex happened. Iranian culture adapted, survived, and eventually reshaped Islamic civilization itself from within. Poetry, philosophy, science, art, and governance in the Islamic Golden Age would carry enormous Persian influence. The old religion faded as a state power, but its imprint remained deeply embedded in Iranian identity. And as Persia entered the Islamic era, a new chapter of cultural transformation and survival was about to begin. The Islamic conquest and the cultural transformation of Persia. When Arab Muslim armies entered Persia in the 7th century, they encountered a civilization exhausted by decades of war, political corruption, and economic strain. The once mighty Sassanid Empire, which had challenged Rome for centuries, was no longer the unstoppable force it had once been. Still, few could imagine how quickly everything would change. Battles like Al-Qadisiyah and Nahavand shattered Persian military resistance. Royal authority collapsed. The last Sassanid king fled eastward, as city after city surrendered to the advancing Islamic forces. For many Persians, it must have felt like the end of their world. Ancient dynasties disappeared. Zoroastrian institutions lost their dominance. A new language, a new religion, and a new political order were taking control of lands shaped by thousands of years of Persian tradition. Yet beneath the shock of conquest, something remarkable began unfolding. Persia was preparing not only to survive Islam, but eventually to help redefine it. At first, the transformation was gradual. Many Persians did not immediately convert to Islam. In numerous regions, Zoroastrian communities continued existing for generations. But over time, economic incentives, political realities, and cultural interaction accelerated the spread of the new faith. Arabic became the language of administration, scholarship, and religious life across the expanding Islamic caliphates. Yet Persian identity proved far too deep to disappear completely. Instead of being erased, Persian culture adapted itself inside the Islamic world. Iranian scholars, poets, administrators, scientists, and philosophers rose to extraordinary influence. In fact, some of the greatest achievements of the Islamic Golden Age carried unmistakably Persian foundations. Cities like Baghdad were deeply shaped by Persian bureaucratic traditions and intellectual life. The conquerors had won militarily, but culturally, Persia remained immensely powerful. This blending of Islamic faith and Persian civilization created one of history's most influential cultural syntheses. Persian literature flourished again through poets like Ferdowsi, whose epic masterpiece, the Shahnameh, preserved the memory of Iran's ancient kings and heroes. At a time when many feared Persia's pre-Islamic identity would vanish forever, Ferdowsi resurrected it through poetry. His work became more than literature, it became cultural resistance through memory. Persian language itself survived and evolved, eventually becoming one of the great literary languages of the Islamic world. Meanwhile, Persian scholars contributed to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and architecture on a scale that shaped global civilization. The irony is extraordinary. Although Persia had been conquered politically, it became intellectually and culturally indispensable to the Islamic empires that followed. But this transformation also carried tension. Deep inside Iranian society, memories of the ancient Persian world never fully disappeared. Pride in pre-Islamic history continued existing alongside Islamic identity. This dual heritage made Iran unique within the Muslim world. Persia embraced Islam, yet remained distinctly Persian. Over time, these layers of identity would shape politics, religion, and even future conflicts across the Middle East. And while Persian civilization adapted successfully to Islamic rule, new waves of destruction were still waiting beyond the horizon. Centuries later, another terrifying force would sweep across Asia with unimaginable violence and empire, built not on administration or philosophy, but on conquest so brutal that entire cities vanished from the map. The Mongols arrived like a storm from another world. Led first by Genghis Khan and later by his descendants, they unleashed devastation across much of the Islamic world, including Persia itself. Libraries burned, cities were massacred, ancient centers of learning collapsed beneath cavalry invasions of terrifying speed and brutality. Once again, Iran faced the possibility of cultural annihilation. And yet, just as it had survived Greeks, Arabs, and imperial collapse before, Persian civilization would once again endure. Because throughout its long history, Iran repeatedly demonstrated something rare among nations: an extraordinary ability to absorb catastrophe without losing its core identity. The impact of the Mongols and Genghis Khan on medieval Iran in the early 13th century. Terrifying rumors began spreading across Asia. Entire cities were disappearing. Kingdoms collapsed in weeks. Survivors described horsemen moving with impossible speed, destroying armies many times their size. These were the Mongols, united under the leadership of Genghis Khan, a conqueror whose name would become synonymous with fear itself. At first, Persia stood far from the center of the storm. But one disastrous political mistake changed everything. After tensions erupted between the Mongols and the Khwarezmian Empire, which ruled much of Iran and Central Asia, Genghis Khan launched one of the most devastating military campaigns in human history. What followed was not a normal war. It was catastrophe on a civilizational scale. The Mongol invasions struck Persian lands with horrifying intensity. Great cities like Nishapur, Merv, and Ray were destroyed. Ancient irrigation systems collapsed. Libraries filled with centuries of scholarship burned to ashes. Historians described mountains of skulls left behind after massacres. In some regions, populations were nearly erased. Persia, once a center of culture, science, and trade, entered one of the darkest periods in its long history. The psychological trauma alone was enormous. For generations, people across Iran remembered the Mongol invasions as an apocalypse. And yet, even within this destruction, history began moving in unexpected directions. Because while the Mongols conquered Persia through terror, they eventually became deeply influenced by the civilization they had conquered. As Mongol rule stabilized under the Ilkhanate dynasty, something remarkable happened. Persian administrators, scholars, artists, and intellectuals slowly regained influence inside the new government. The conquerors, who had arrived as destroyers, gradually adopted elements of Persian culture. Mongol rulers converted to Islam. Persian became the language of administration and literature once again. Art, architecture, astronomy, and philosophy experienced renewal under new patronage. Cities were rebuilt. Trade routes reopened. Iran re-emerged as a crucial link between East and West, connecting China, India, the Middle East, and Europe through revived Silk Road networks. It was one of the great paradoxes of history. The same invasion that nearly destroyed Persian civilization also helped integrate it into a massive Eurasian world system. Still, the scars remained. Entire regions never fully recovered from the demographic collapse caused by the Mongol invasions. Political fragmentation continued weakening Iran for centuries afterward. Various dynasties rose and fell while foreign powers competed for influence. Yet during this long period of instability, a deeper transformation was quietly developing inside Persian society. Religious identity began evolving in ways that would permanently redefine the future of Iran. A branch of Islam known as Shi'ism gradually gained stronger roots among Persian populations. Over time, this religious shift would become one of the most important turning points in Iranian history, not only spiritually, but politically and culturally as well. Then, in the 16th century, a new dynasty emerged with extraordinary ambition. The Safavids would reunify Persia, restore centralized power, and do something no previous Iranian empire had ever attempted on such a scale: establish Shiite Islam as the official religion of the state. This decision would reshape Iran's identity forever and create divisions within the Islamic world that still influence global politics today. After centuries of invasion, collapse, and survival, Persia was about to reinvent itself once again, merely as an empire, but as the foundation of a distinctly Shiite Iranian nation. The rise of the Safavid Empire and the birth of Shiite Iran. By the beginning of the 16th century, Persia had spent centuries fragmented by invasions, rival dynasties, and political instability. The glory of the ancient empire seemed distant, almost mythical. Yet beneath the chaos, a powerful religious and cultural movement was growing. It began with a Sufi order led by charismatic spiritual figures, whose followers were fiercely loyal and deeply militant. From this movement emerged a young leader named Ismail Safavi. He was barely a teenager when he launched a campaign that would transform Iran forever. Against overwhelming odds, Ismail conquered vast territories and declared himself Shah of Persia in 1501. But military victory was only part of his revolution. What truly changed history was his decision to make Twelver Shiite Islam the official religion of the state. In that moment, the foundations of modern Iranian identity were born. This decision created a dramatic break with much of the surrounding Islamic world, which was predominantly Sunni. The Safavid rulers understood that religion could unify Persia after centuries of fragmentation. Shiism became not only a faith, but a political identity capable of distinguishing Iran from powerful rivals like the Ottoman Empire. Religious scholars were invited to strengthen Shiite institutions. Mosques, schools, and shrines spread across the country. Over time, Shiite rituals, commemorations, and theology became deeply woven into Persian social life. What made this transformation extraordinary was its long-term impact. Even today, centuries later, Shiite Islam remains one of the defining pillars of the Iranian state. The Safavids did not simply establish another dynasty, they permanently reshaped the spiritual and political character of Iran itself. Under rulers like Shah Abbas the Great, the Safavid Empire entered a golden age of culture, trade, and architecture. The capital city of Isfahan became one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Travelers described magnificent mosques covered in blue tiles, grand bridges crossing elegant rivers, bustling markets filled with silk and spices, and palaces reflecting extraordinary artistic sophistication. Persian art flourished through miniature painting, carpet weaving, poetry, and calligraphy. Trade expanded dramatically as Iran positioned itself between Europe and Asia once again. European merchants arrived seeking Persian silk and diplomatic alliances against the Ottomans. Persia was no longer merely surviving history, it was actively shaping global commerce and geopolitics. But beneath the elegance of Safavid civilization, tensions continued building. Constant wars with the Ottoman Empire drained resources and deepened sectarian divisions between Sunni and Shiite powers across the region. Internal corruption and dynastic struggles gradually weakened the empire from within. By the 18th century, the Safavid state began collapsing under military pressure and political instability. Once again, Iran entered a period of fragmentation. Foreign powers increasingly interfered in Persian affairs. Russia expanded southward. Britain sought influence to protect trade routes and later oil interests. The age of ancient-style empires was fading, and a new era of global imperial competition was beginning. For the first time in its history, Persia faced not only military threats, but economic domination by industrial superpowers. Western influence penetrated Iranian politics, trade, and resources with growing intensity. And then came the discovery that would change everything forever: oil. Hidden beneath Iranian soil was one of the most valuable resources of the modern age. Foreign governments and corporations understood its importance immediately. What followed would pull Iran into a dangerous struggle, involving exploitation, modernization, nationalism, revolution, and global power politics. The next chapter of Iranian history would no longer be fought only with swords and empires. It would be fought with industry, ideology, and control over energy itself. Oil, British influence, and the beginning of Iran's modern crisis. At the dawn of the 20th century, Persia stood at a dangerous crossroads. The great empires of the ancient world were gone, but new powers had emerged: industrial nations driven by factories, global trade, and an insatiable hunger for resources. Among those resources, one would become more valuable than almost anything else on Earth: oil. In 1908, vast oil reserves were discovered in southwestern Persia, and almost overnight, the country became strategically essential to the modern world. For Britain, whose navy was shifting from coal to oil-powered ships, controlling Persian oil became a national priority. The British-backed Anglo-Persian Oil Company secured enormous concessions that gave foreign interests extraordinary control over Iran's natural wealth. To many ordinary Iranians, it felt as if outsiders were becoming rich from resources that belonged to their own nation, while much of the population remained poor and politically powerless. This growing resentment fueled a wave of nationalism and frustration. Persia's rulers appeared weak before foreign influence. Britain and Russia competed openly for dominance inside the country, treating Iran less like a sovereign nation and more like a geopolitical prize. In cities and villages alike, people began asking painful questions. How could a civilization with thousands of years of history lose control over its own future? Why were foreign governments shaping Iranian politics, while ordinary citizens struggled economically? These frustrations intensified during the constitutional revolution of the early 1900s, when reformers demanded limits on royal authority and greater political representation. For a moment, it seemed Iran might successfully modernize through constitutional government. But external pressure, internal divisions, and political instability repeatedly undermined reform efforts. Then, in the 1920s, a military officer named Reza Khan seized power and eventually crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi. Determined to modernize Iran rapidly, he launched ambitious reforms inspired partly by Western models. Railways were built, schools expanded, infrastructure improved, Tribal powers were weakened to strengthen the central state. Reza Shah believed Iran needed a strong national identity capable of resisting foreign domination. He even revived emphasis on Persia's ancient pre-Islamic history, connecting modern Iran to the legacy of Cyrus and Darius. Yet modernization came with authoritarian control. Political opposition was suppressed, and many traditional religious leaders distrusted the pace of change. Iran was modernizing materially, but beneath the surface, tensions between tradition and modernization were growing more explosive each year. World War II transformed the situation dramatically. Allied forces invaded Iran in 1941, fearing Reza Shah's relations with Germany and seeking secure oil supplies. He was forced to abdicate in favor of his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. After the war, nationalist anger over foreign control of oil reached a boiling point. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized Iran's oil industry, an act celebrated by many Iranians as a bold defense of sovereignty. But Britain and the United States viewed the move as a threat to their strategic interests during the Cold War. In 1953, a CIA and British-backed coup overthrew Mossadegh and restored the Shah's authority. For many Iranians, this event became a deep national trauma moment when democratic aspirations were crushed by foreign intervention. The consequences of that coup would echo across generations. The Shah, now strongly supported by the West, accelerated modernization and centralized power even further. Tehran grew rapidly. Western culture became increasingly visible in urban life. Economic development transformed parts of society. Yet millions of Iranians felt disconnected from this new vision of the country. Religious leaders condemned moral corruption and foreign influence. Intellectuals criticized dictatorship and inequality. Beneath the surface of apparent progress, anger was building quietly across Iran. And eventually, that pressure would explode into one of the most dramatic revolutions of the 20th century. Revolution that would overthrow the monarchy, challenge the West, and permanently redefine Iran's relationship with the modern world. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and the attempt to modernize Iran. When Mohammad Reza Pahlavi fully consolidated power after the 1953 coup, he envisioned transforming Iran into a modern global powerhouse. The young Shah believed history had given him a mission to propel Iran out of poverty and tradition into industrial strength, technological advancement, and international prestige. Fueled by soaring oil revenues, his government launched massive modernization projects across the country. Highways expanded through deserts and mountains. Universities multiplied. Factories emerged in growing urban centers. Tehran transformed into a fast-moving capital filled with luxury hotels, modern architecture, cinemas, and Western influence. To foreign observers, Iran appeared to be becoming one of the most advanced nations in the Middle East. The Shah presented himself as the architect of a new Iran, powerful, secular, modern, and deeply connected to the West. One of his most ambitious programs became known as the White Revolution. Land reforms aimed to weaken old feudal elites and redistribute property to peasants. Women gained expanded rights, including voting access and greater educational opportunities. Literacy campaigns reached rural populations that had long been neglected. Health services improved in many regions. On paper, these reforms looked revolutionary, and for part of the population, especially urban middle and upper classes, they represented real progress. Iran's economy grew rapidly during the 1960s and 1970s. Oil wealth financed grand infrastructure projects and military expansion. The Shah purchased advanced Western weapons and dreamed of making Iran the dominant power of the Persian Gulf. But modernization imposed from above often creates unintended consequences below the surface. For many ordinary Iranians, the benefits of rapid development felt uneven and disorienting. Rural migration flooded cities faster than infrastructure could adapt. Traditional communities weakened. Inflation and corruption spread while elites enjoyed wealth and luxury. Many poorer citizens struggled with rising costs and social inequality. At the same time, the Shah ruled increasingly through authoritarian control. His secret police force, Savak, became infamous for surveillance, intimidation, imprisonment, and torture of political opponents. Intellectuals, students, religious leaders, and activists grew deeply frustrated with the lack of political freedom. What made the situation especially explosive was the growing perception that modernization was coming at the expense of Iranian identity itself. Western clothing, entertainment, and social values became highly visible in urban life, leading many conservative and religious groups to believe the country was losing its moral and spiritual foundations. Among the Shah's most powerful critics was a religious scholar living in exile, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. From abroad, Khomeini denounced the monarchy as corrupt, tyrannical, and submissive to foreign powers, particularly the United States. His speeches and recorded messages circulated secretly throughout Iran, reaching millions of frustrated citizens. What made Khomeini dangerous to the regime was his ability to unite very different groups under a shared sense of anger. Religious conservatives opposed secularization. Students demanded political freedom. Nationalists resented foreign influence. Workers struggled economically, despite oil wealth. These frustrations slowly merged into a massive opposition movement. And while the Shah still appeared powerful internationally, cracks were spreading rapidly inside Iranian society. Then, in the late 1970s, the pressure finally erupted. Massive protests filled the streets of Iranian cities. Demonstrations grew larger despite violent crackdowns. Strikes paralyzed key industries, including oil production. The monarchy that once seemed untouchable suddenly looked fragile. The Shah's attempts at reform came too late to stop the momentum building against him. Millions of Iranians no longer wanted adjustment, they wanted transformation. And in 1979, after centuries of monarchy stretching back through Persian history, the throne collapsed. The Shah fled the country. Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile to triumphant crowds. What followed would shock the entire world and permanently alter the balance of power in the Middle East forever. The Islamic Revolution of 1979 and the arrival of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. In the winter of 1979, the world watched one of the most astonishing political collapses of the 20th century. Only months earlier, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi had ruled with immense military power, enormous oil wealth, and strong support from Western governments. Yet suddenly, millions of Iranians flooded the streets, demanding the end of the monarchy. Protesters came from every layer of society: religious leaders, students, workers, intellectuals, merchants, and ordinary families exhausted by corruption, inequality, and political repression. The demonstrations became impossible to contain. Soldiers hesitated. Government institutions weakened. Fear spread inside the royal court. Then came the moment that symbolized the end of an era. The Shah left Iran in January 1979, officially for medical treatment, but most people understood the truth. The monarchy that had ruled Persia in various forms for thousands of years was collapsing before the eyes of history. Just weeks later, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile to an emotional reception unlike anything modern Iran had seen. Millions gathered to welcome the religious leader, whose speeches had inspired the revolution from abroad. To his supporters, Khomeini represented resistance against tyranny, foreign domination, and moral decay. He spoke in the language of justice, sacrifice, spirituality, and independence. But what made the revolution so powerful was that different groups projected different hopes onto it. Some wanted Islamic government. Others imagined democracy and political freedom. Many simply wanted dignity restored after decades of authoritarian rule and foreign interference. In those chaotic revolutionary days, possibility seemed limitless. Yet revolutions rarely remain unified for long. Once the monarchy fell completely, a struggle began over what the new Iran would actually become. Khomeini and his allies moved quickly to consolidate power. The monarchy was abolished, and Iran officially became an Islamic republic. A new political system emerged, combining elements of republican institutions with religious authority under the concept of vilayat-e-faqih, or guardianship, of the Islamic jurist. This gave supreme power to senior religious leadership, placing the revolution firmly under clerical control. Opposition groups that had once stood together against the Shah soon found themselves marginalized, imprisoned, or eliminated politically. Secular activists, liberals, leftists, and rival revolutionary factions discovered that the new state would not tolerate challenges to its authority. Meanwhile, revolutionary fervor transformed Iranian society. Religious symbolism became central to public life. Western influence was rejected aggressively. The U.S. Embassy hostage crisis in Tehran shocked the world and shattered relations between Iran and the United States for generations to come. Then came another devastating challenge. In 1980, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, hoping to exploit post-revolutionary chaos and weaken the new Islamic Republic before it stabilized. Instead, the invasion triggered one of the bloodiest conflicts in modern Middle Eastern history. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 brutal years. Hundreds of thousands died. Cities were bombed. Chemical weapons were used. Entire generations were shaped by sacrifice, grief, and nationalism forged through war. Yet the conflict also strengthened the revolutionary government. Faced with foreign invasion, many Iranians rallied around the Islamic Republic, despite internal disagreements. The war transformed Iran into a hardened, deeply ideological state, determined never again to appear vulnerable before foreign powers. By the time the war ended and Khomeini died in 1989, Iran had been fundamentally transformed. The ancient Persian monarchy was gone. In its place stood a revolutionary Islamic state unlike any other in the modern world, deeply religious, fiercely anti-Western, politically complex, and determined to defend its independence at almost any cost. But the revolution did not end with Khomeini's death. Leadership passed to another powerful cleric who would guide Iran through decades of sanctions, regional conflicts, nuclear tensions, and global confrontation. His name was Ali Khamenei, and under his rule, Iran would become one of the most influential and controversial powers in the modern Middle East. The rule of Ali Khamenei and Iran's conflicts with the West. When Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini died in 1989, many wondered whether the Islamic Republic could survive without the revolutionary figure who had defined it. The country was exhausted from years of war with Iraq. Its economy struggled under pressure. International isolation continued growing. Yet from this uncertain moment emerged a new supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Unlike Khomeini, Khomeini did not possess the same overwhelming religious charisma or revolutionary mythology. But over time, he consolidated immense authority, carefully strengthening the institutions of the Islamic Republic and positioning himself as the guardian of Iran's revolutionary identity. Under his leadership, Iran entered a new era, one shaped not only by internal control, but by increasingly intense confrontation with the West, especially the United States. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Iran pursued a complicated path, balancing pragmatism and ideological resistance. Elections continued inside the Islamic Republic, creating moments of reformist optimism. But ultimate authority remained centered around the supreme leader and the powerful religious security structure surrounding him. Many Iranians hoped for greater social freedoms and international openness. Others feared that relaxing revolutionary principles would expose the country once again to foreign domination. This tension became one of the defining struggles of modern Iran: how to modernize economically and technologically without losing political sovereignty or religious identity. Meanwhile, Western governments increasingly viewed Iran as a destabilizing force in the Middle East due to its support for armed groups across the region and its hostility toward Israel and U.S. influence. Then came the issue that would dominate global headlines for decades: Iran's nuclear program. Iranian leaders insisted the program existed for peaceful energy and scientific development. But many Western nations feared Iran was moving toward the capacity to build nuclear weapons. Sanctions intensified. Diplomatic crises escalated. Economic pressure hit ordinary Iranians hard, causing inflation, unemployment, and widespread frustration. Yet, instead of collapsing under isolation, Iran adapted in ways that surprised many observers. The government invested heavily in domestic military industries, missile programs, cyber capabilities, and regional alliances. Across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, Iran expanded its influence through networks of political and military partnerships. To supporters, Iran was resisting foreign domination and defending regional independence. To critics, it was fueling instability and conflict throughout the Middle East. Inside Iran itself, society became increasingly complex and divided. Major cities evolved into highly educated urban centers connected to global culture through technology and social media. Young generations pushed for social reforms, economic opportunities, and greater freedoms. At the same time, conservative institutions remained deeply committed to preserving the ideological foundations of the revolution. Periodic protests revealed growing frustration over economic hardship, corruption, and political restrictions. Yet despite enormous pressure from sanctions, international isolation, cyber attacks, assassinations of scientists, and regional tensions, the Islamic Republic endured. This resilience reflected something much older than the modern regime itself. Across thousands of years, Iran had repeatedly survived invasions, imperial collapse, foreign interference, and internal upheaval. That historical memory shaped how many Iranians viewed resistance and national sovereignty in the modern era. Today, Iran stands as one of the most influential and controversial nations in the world. It is a country where ancient Persian identity, Shiite religious ideology, revolutionary politics, and geopolitical ambition all exist simultaneously. Its decisions affect global energy markets, regional wars, international diplomacy, and the balance of power across the Middle East. But to truly understand modern Iran, It is not enough to focus only on headlines about sanctions or nuclear negotiations. Iran's present was shaped by 5,000 years of survival, adaptation, conquest, and reinvention. From Cyrus the Great to Ali Khamenei. The story of Iran is ultimately the story of a civilization that refused to disappear even when history repeatedly tried to erase it. And after traveling through 5,000 years of history, from the rise of Cyrus the Great to the modern tensions shaping today's Middle East, you begin to realize something extraordinary. Iran is not just another country on the map. It is one of the oldest surviving civilizations on Earth. An empire that faced Greeks, Romans, Mongols, empires, revolutions, invasions, sanctions, and global pressure, yet still preserved its identity through every generation. And maybe that is why the story of Iran continues to fascinate the world. Because this is not simply the history of kings and wars. It is the story of how a civilization survives when everything around it changes. Now I want to hear from you. What part of Iran's history shocked you the most? Was it the greatness of the Persian Empire, the rise of Islam, the Mongol destruction, or the revolution of 1979? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because your perspective makes this conversation even more powerful. And if you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because there are many more incredible civilizations, forgotten empires, and hidden stories waiting to be explored. Give this video a like, because that helps YouTube share this content with more people who love history as much as you do. And trust me, the next stories coming to this channel are even more fascinating. History is not dead. It still shapes the world we live in today. See you in the next video.